Um, Welcome to the last session of the Week of Evolution webinar series. We, as Boğaziçi University Science Club Trio Evolution Committee, collaborated with many scientists who are the experts in their fields to present an evolution themed series to you. We wanted to use the opportunities of the online platform to meet with professors all around the world.
Our mission was always to spread accurate scientific information and create platforms where science can be freely discussed and told. When the conditions present in our country are taken into account, it is even more crucial to do so.
Therefore, we would like to restate the necessity for free academy as we still protest and stand against the appointed rectors and their undue sanctions.
Both university members have been standing against this anti-democratic situation for more than a year.
And aside from that, this year we had 9 seminars during last week. Today we will welcome author, primatologist, and biologist Frans de Waal as our last guest. Today we will talk about general topic of primatology and his famous 2 books, Mama's Last Attack and Bonobo and the Atheist.
Additionally, we will have Aslan Niksar'la today in today's broadcast too. She's currently working on the field of primatology and animal behavior. She will accompany us today as someone from the field itself.
And during our talk, you can write your questions via the chat as usual. Our team will be there to compile and direct your questions. And welcome again, Mr. de Waal. So it's such a great pleasure to welcome you as our last guest.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be here. Happy to be here, and I have never been in Turkey, and so one day I should come because I'm always interested in meeting young people who want to enter the field. You know, primatology is not a field, as everyone knows, where you go to make a lot of money. That's it's a field of passion. You go because you're interested in animals, you're interested in primates. Sometimes primates in the wild, sometimes primates in captivity. I've worked mostly in captivity, and in my books, I try to convey that we are primates. That's actually my main message. I think to people is that we are primates, and psychologically and mentally and emotionally, we are like other primates. We may have a few advantages intellectually, which everyone recognizes. For example, what we're doing now at this moment with technology and language is just inconceivable for other primates. So there are some special features to the human species, that's for sure. But in general, I consider us primates, and in the way we interact normally. So, for example, with the COVID crisis, which you probably also have in Turkey, is everywhere, we have noticed how important it is for us to be close to people and to see them up close and to smell them and to touch them. And people, you know, now that people are vaccinated or have the booster shot and can get together again sometimes, although that's at the moment is problematic. But you can see how people long to be together. And that togetherness is not replaced by a Zoom session or by some digital contact. So clearly we are, in that sense, we are primates, is that we are not satisfied with just seeing a little picture of someone. We want to have more contact than that. And I always feel that that has been underestimated. I remember that 10 years ago, people would say, oh, no, at the universities, we will have not professors anymore. We will just do everything by computer and internet, and that's how we will handle everything at the university. And it's clear now that that's not going to happen because people are very dissatisfied with that kind of system. And that is because we are primates and we need to be close to people. So that's what I wanted to say. Is my main message in my book always is that we are not fundamentally different in that regard.
Yeah, so for starters, we want to talk in a general manner, firstly. So also this is a personal interest of me too. So how did you become interested in primatology firstly, since it was not a popular subject in past compared to now? And how did you start working in this field? What inspired you?
Well, my first interest was animals. As a kid, and I think that's true for many naturalists, I was very interested in having animals, catching animals, usually keeping them alive if I could, like fish and frogs and mice and animals like that. So I was very interested in animals. And so when I went to the university, it was for me logical to go into biology. And so I studied biology. I was very unhappy with the biology at the time because it was all, and that's still the case with biology, it's all molecular. They called it biochemistry at the time. And I was very unhappy with that. That was really not what I was looking for. I was not looking for dead animals, and I was not looking for chemical equations and stuff like that. And so I went to a different university where they worked in ethology, so animal behavior. And I was very happy there. I worked with rats and with birds. And then at some point, I ended up with a professor who worked on primates. So that for me, that was a sort of accidental. I could have ended up with fish. I'm a big fan of fish. You see behind me, one of my fish tanks. I have several of these big fish tanks. So I'm very interested in all sorts of animals. But I ended up with chimpanzees at first. And I was, of course, extremely impressed by chimpanzees because I'd never seen an animal so smart. You may think that your dog is smart, but compared to a dog, a chimpanzee is a lot smarter than a dog. So I was very impressed by them. And then at some point, I got an invitation to come to the United States, and so that's why I was at that time in the Netherlands, and so now for the last 30 years or 40 years, I've been in the United States.
Yeah. Also, since as you mentioned, like it is a unique subject to study on. So, how did primatology shape your life? Maybe your travels, maybe your view of life. How was it shaped with primatology?
Yeah, primatology has the problem that if you work with animals in captivity, that very few universities will have primates or can have primates. And especially nowadays, it's even more problematic because it's a very expensive operation to set up a primate center. And so most universities don't do that anymore. And for the people in the field who work in the field, there is the problem of conservation and with climate change and with the 8 billion people that we have in the world, the primates in the wild have a lot of trouble too. And so I think primatology is a bit of a struggle. It's much easier to work with rats or with little birds than with, let's say, chimpanzees. It's very difficult to find them in the universities. And so I have always worked at places that had them. I worked with zoos sometimes, like in the Netherlands or at the San Diego Zoo, or I worked at primate centers. And I always looked for places that had primates in social settings because I'm not interested in cages with primates. I'm interested in a social group that lives preferably outdoors. And so that's always what I've worked with that kind of animals. But it is a bit of a struggle to be a primatologist. It's not the easiest thing. And also not everyone takes you seriously. You work with monkeys and they don't think that's a serious business. And also you get people who are upset that if you work with captive primates, that they are captive. They are upset that you have captive animals. Even though the chimpanzees that I've worked with here at the Yerkes Primate Center, none of these chimpanzees comes from the wild. They're all third generation or fourth generation. Long ago, people took the chimpanzees from the wild, and now they are in captivity breeding. And of course, now the breeding has stopped. In the United States, the research facilities don't breed with chimpanzees anymore. And so in 10, 20 years, they will all be gone, I think, because all of them are aging at the moment. And I'm involved in Chimp Haven, which is, I don't know if you know that, but Chimp Haven is a big sanctuary in the United States where we have maybe 400 chimpanzees. Many of the chimpanzees from the laboratories, they are retired. They come to Chimp Haven. We release them. We have very large islands there. We release them in the forest in large islands, and they are retired chimpanzees basically. So I'm on the board of Chimp Haven. I think that's the way we are going, which means that 10, 20 years from now in captivity, there will be very few chimpanzees, except maybe in the zoos.
I can only imagine that.
Although this is such a general question, it was one of the questions that I was curious about as someone who is interested in this field, because now I'm a molecular biology and genetics student, but actually my special interest is not molecular biology or not molecular basis. My special interests are cognitive biology and behavioral biology. So now I'm trying to find myself for a place between these two lines. So I'm very happy to hear your story.
Yeah.
It's inspired me.
Yeah, there's quite a few field workers now who are interested in oxytocin, testosterone. They're taking measures. They're doing, of course, collecting fecal samples to get at the DNA. And so the collaboration between laboratories, molecular laboratories, and the field workers has increased. They are really collaborating with people. And of course, that also means that the collaboration between field workers and captive workers has increased, I think. And so in the old days, there was animosity between the two in the sense that the field workers, they did not like captive primates and they were opposed to them. And the captive workers often thought that field workers were not systematic enough and they couldn't do experiments and things like that. So there was an animosity between the two groups, but I think there's more collaboration now between them.
Following this question, another thing that I have always wondered about you is where did your search for meaning in the art of Bosch, which you mentioned in your Bonobo and the Atheist book, specifically based on the Garden of the Earthly Delights, came from, and how has it influenced your perspective on primatology? Because it's such a strange thing, art and primatology, such a strange subjects to get together. So
Yeah.
I'm really curious about that.
Well, I'm very interested in the visual arts, like photography and paintings. So I like all sorts of painters. And Hieronymus Bosch happens to be the painter from the city where I came from, and so is a painter I've always known. And when I started writing again about the evolution of morality, because the book, The Bonobo and the Atheist, is basically about morality, I thought, well, let me bring in Bosch, because Bosch lived in a time where the church influence, the Catholic Church influence was diminishing, and where philosophers would say, well, we don't maybe need religion for morality. We can maybe develop morality in a different way. And so he lived at exactly that time, and you can see in his paintings that he was hesitating. Like, do we need God to be moral, or do we not? Can we be moral in other ways? And so he lived in a time where people were struggling with that, where also the philosopher Erasmus in the Netherlands was struggling with that idea. And so that's how I brought him into the book. The illustration, I thought it was sort of fun to introduce art into a discussion about primates and morality.
So where do you, so while when we're talking about morality, I want to ask something too. Where do you place human morality and how morality is observed among different species? So what are the borders for human morality, of course, if any present? Maybe we can start talking with what morality is morality is, if of course, because to be more clear, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, morality is about the behavior that we accept or don't accept, or the behavior that we encourage in society or discourage in society. Usually we phrase it as good and bad, we say right and wrong. And we are clearly more obsessed with morality, I think, than other species. We are very obsessed by it. But it is often presented as if morality is a sort of human religious or philosophical invention. And I don't agree with that. I think in other primates, you can also see behavior that is accepted or not accepted. And you can also see the fundamentals of caring for others, which is part of human morality, is that we should care for others. And so I actually got into that topic because I started working on empathy in the primates. And as soon as you work on empathy, you can see that human morality comes into play, because as soon as you mention morality, it is about, do we care about others? Do we do things for others? So empathy comes into play. So it's from the study of empathy that I moved to what is the origin of morality. And in psychology, sort of the same development happened, not with me, but human psychologists who at the same time started speculating, like Jonathan Haidt and people like that. They started speculating that morality has an intuitive basis. And what they mean is that it's not all a construction, a sort of mental construction, because that's how many philosophers used to see human morality, as based on reasoning and logic. And the psychologists were saying, no, there's a lot of gut feeling and intuition and emotion involved in morality that makes us decide this is the good behavior and that's the bad behavior. And so I got interested in that because I think that's the sort of morality that the primates understand, is that they react to certain situations. It's not based on reasoning and logic, but it's like, this behavior we accept and this we don't accept. So, for example, in chimpanzees, in the captive groups that I work with, males can punish, adult males can punish juveniles, but they cannot use, if they use their canines, which is the big teeth that they have, the whole group protests against it. It's not accepted in the group usually. So males can chase a juvenile and maybe even hit them, and that's fine as a punishment. But if they use their canines, everyone protests and they go after the male and they chase the male. So they have a limit of things that they accept. And I think in humans we have a lot of that kind of limits.
Yes, I just wanted to make an addition that I am also a molecular biologist, actually an undergraduate, but more interested in the molecular part of it. So when I read your book, like this really struck me, that you somehow looking at morality from an evolutionary perspective, but somehow like it is coded in our genomes, like because also we share this with other primates too. So can we call this a genomic heritage too, alongside with a social skill like empathy, sympathy, or is it more of a social skill that we develop later in our adulthood or teenage?
Yeah, morality is, the moral rules that we follow are not, I think, encoded in our biology. They because that would mean that they always stay the same, and that they are the same in this society and that society. And you know that moral rules vary over time, and they vary from place to place. And so they cannot be engraved, so to speak, in our biology, but they derive from our basic primate psychology. So we have a psychology that includes hierarchy and social positions. It includes empathy and sympathy. It includes sharing with others. So there's many parts of our psychology that we use in our moral systems, and then the system itself that we follow is decided by the society in which we live. And that's also why I don't believe that it's decided by rational processes necessarily or by philosophers. There are certain, in the Bonobo and the Atheist, I talk quite a bit about a group of atheists that we have in this country, like Sam Harris or like Richard Dawkins. There are atheists who say that morality should be based on science. The scientists should decide what the moral rules are. And I personally don't trust scientists. And I'm a scientist, but I don't trust scientists to decide what the moral rules should be, because I think scientists make errors in that kind of. So, for example, scientists, for a long time, we believed, before World War II, we believed that eugenics was wonderful science. Eugenics meaning that you breed people and that you eliminate certain people that you don't want. And now we look, of course, at eugenics as morally completely wrong, as very problematic. But I don't think scientists can be trusted. So that idea that science is going to tell us what morality is, I think is wrong. I think the society as a whole decides what the rules are going to be. And they make use, in doing that, they make use of our primate psychology, which includes certain elements like empathy and so on that are important in that regard. And the rules will change from society to society, and over time they will change also. The rules change.
Thank you for that. And I have a couple questions about probably more like the ethical and morality side as well. But before going into that, we recall that in Bonobo and Atheist, you state that moral behaviors emerge from our evolved nature, not from the religion. And one aspect that we always confront that, we always want to separate ourselves from primates. Like we keep saying that we're not primates, we're not apes, especially in our society here. And so first we said we make tools, then we said we have culture, then we said we have language. And now some of the debates still say that we have morality and animals don't. So this is a debate that we want to separate us. So we were talking the other day in our reading group that are there any distinctions? Like, do you feel like there are distinctions, although you say that we are primates? Do you feel like there are distinctions in like human and animal, or like does this distinction needed? I think that's the main question. Why are we still after this?
Yeah, people do want to be special. So whatever you say, and we have gone through so many cycles. So the last one, like 10 years ago, was theory of mind, was uniquely human. Even though the term theory of mind comes from a chimpanzee study, it doesn't come from a human study. It started with a chimp study. But then people started to insist that only we have it. And now we have some recent experiments on chimpanzees and other apes that indicate that actually they do have theory of mind. A very nice study by Chris Coupenye. So we're back to square one on that. And people keep coming up with these distinctions that I don't think are particularly meaningful. The only distinction that I recognize is that we have language. I do think that a learned symbolic language, as we do have, I think that's very special. So we have a few unique characteristics, but it's basically the outlook that I have trouble with. And so in certain fields like anthropology, philosophy, in the old days also in psychology, but that has changed now. But there were many disciplines that insisted on how special humans are. And that's every book would start with only humans can do this, or only humans have that. And That was the focus. And if you look at medicine and neuroscience and biology, those fields don't say that. Of course, those fields consider humans as part of the animal kingdom. And it's under influence of the neuroscience that the psychologists are now changing. The psychologists, all the psychology departments, maybe also in your country, they have a few neuroscientists nowadays, or sometimes they have many of them. And the neuroscientists, of course, they know that the rat brain and the human brain are not very different. The human brain is a lot bigger and more powerful, but it's not a fundamentally different brain. And so the neuroscientists are pushing also for a more evolutionary approach. So that is happening, but we keep having people, and you probably know many of them. We keep having scientists and academics who feel that humans are some special category, some different category. And I would add here also that is a very problematic position we see at the moment with the COVID crisis, and also with the climate change. We see that it's very problematic to set humans apart from nature. We have been trying to do that, but nature is now coming back to bite us, basically. Nature is saying, well, you cannot do everything you want with Earth. You cannot eat bats. It's not a good thing to do that. Basically, nature is telling us we have to be more careful and we have to be more respectful. And so the position that humans are part of nature, that humans are animals in a world of animals, basically, of animals and plants, that is the only position we can actually have. And this tendency to set ourselves apart and to consider ourselves as something special and as a species that can dominate the earth and can exploit it any way we want, I think that's not a sustainable position. And so I think that attitude is also changing at the moment. But it's very slow process, clearly.
There is always this feeling that we are the owner of the world. Instead, we are the part of the world and the ecosystem, and we keep forgetting that we are just the one small part of it. Yeah. And I think we use language, religion, culture, whatever so on, and keep saying that we have this and they don't. So we are more higher in this hierarchy, although there is no hierarchy in the nature in terms of what we just talked. But I also want to take back us to something like you mentioned that you have been doing field studies also in captivity. And so that's something we have been wondering, that we all highlighted one sentence, as you mentioned, that in the Mama's Last Hug, you said that looking beyond is the central key for the observation. And could you elaborate on that? Like, what observation means in terms of observation? Because we know that you start observing people when you're a very young age, but how is that journey feels, and what does looking beyond actually means? What does it gives to us?
Looking beyond the immediate situation, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That is. Yes, I think if you watch a group of animals, and it doesn't matter if that's in the field or in captivity, if you see, like, let's say 25 chimpanzees, all of them are moving and doing things. I think inexperienced observers, they have a tendency to focus on one thing. So let's say there's a fight. They will look at the fight and they will see the fight, and who knows, they may be very good at observing the fight, but they lose track of everything else that's going on. Whereas all these other individuals around, they are also watching and they're influenced, and they approach or they leave or they may do other things. And I think an observer needs to divide his attention. So you need to look beyond the immediate situation, because there's many other things going on. And the beginners, when people start observing animals, I think they see very little. I usually compare it with my students. when they come and start watching chimpanzees, I usually say it will take you at least a year before you start seeing things. And because in the first year, they are overwhelmed by all the sounds and the movements, and they cannot make sense of it. It's a bit like if you look at a soccer game, let's say you don't know anything about football, and you look at a football game, I mean the European or Turkish football, the soccer, and you look at it, you don't see anything. You may see the ball and you may follow the ball and what happens with it. But there's much more going on than that ball. There's all these other players that are moving and reacting and strategizing. And what happens around the ball is not the only important thing. So I think if you don't know football, you probably see only 10% of what's going on. And the same is true if you don't know primate behavior, you see only a small fraction of what's going on.
Aslan. Okay. Speaking of observations, I want to ask something too. When we do animal observations, could we anthropocentrically attribute our human emotions to animals? So do you think that is it possible to make an objective or ecocentric observation?
Yeah, it's difficult. Of course, in my book on Mama's Last Hug, I try to make a distinction between feelings and emotions. It's like what the animals feel is a different issue for me, because I cannot exactly know what they feel. I assume that chimpanzees have the same sort of feelings as we do, but feelings are private states, and in humans we communicate feelings by language. I can tell you my feelings. And the problem is, of course, that even if I tell you what I feel, you still don't know. You don't know exactly what I feel. You have to sort of believe me, and even then, you don't know what I'm feeling. Now, emotions is different. Emotions are always expressed in the body. So emotions live somewhere between the mind and the body. And if someone would approach you and say, "I was very emotional," and nothing happened to his body, no heart rate changes, no blood pressure, no temperature, no facial expressions. Nothing happened to his body. We don't believe he was very emotional because we think emotions are going to be expressed in the body one way or another. And so emotions can also be measured for that reason. We can see the facial expressions, we can see the behavior. Sometimes physiologically, we can see the heart rate and so on. And so emotions are measurable. And that's often forgotten by people when they say, well, you cannot study the emotions of animals because what do you know? I think they're confusing feelings with emotions. Emotions can be measured. Feelings are hard to know in animals.
So additionally, do you think that human-centered, observing animals from human-centered perspective degrade the quality of information?
Yeah, the anthropocentric attitude, it's hard to avoid because we always extrapolate from ourselves and we think of how we would feel in that situation and so on. So it's very hard to avoid. But we have to get over it in the sense that if you want to understand, let's say, the intelligence of the elephant, you have to think a little bit like an elephant, and you have to understand that their body is not the same as our body. And the same is true for the octopus, for example. So it's even more so. So with the elephant, of course, I've worked a little bit with elephants, but the people think, for example, that the trunk of the elephant is like a hand and like an arm, but it's very different. It's a smelling organ, and they smell 100 times better than a dog, and a dog smells 100 times better than us. So you can imagine what an elephant can smell. It's just incredible. And so in order to understand that kind of species, we need to move away from our anthropocentric bias. And of course, the scientists are doing that increasingly at the moment. They are increasingly looking at species that are quite different from us. All the work on birds, for example, a bird is really not the same as a primate, even though they do sometimes things that are very similar. But to understand birds, that takes a very different approach in general.
I think we can keep going on observations, and actually, this is the most sorry,
Maybe most
because-
confusing question that we ever had
that we have ever had. Yeah. In one of your books, actually in Mama's last talk, you make such a comment like, working on what is closest to people has always been scary. And in one of my colleagues' experiments with robots and human children, they observed the similar conditions that you expressed in your book. So in fact, when we looked at chimpanzees and bonobos, we encountered the appearance of human in wigs. So can we relate this to uncanny valley hypothesis? And also, what is closest to people has always been scary?
Yeah, I think primates have been scary because they, especially the apes, they remind us too much of how animal-like we are. So when the first apes came to the London Zoo and the Paris Zoo, those were the first zoos who had live apes. People were scared of them, and people, for example, Queen Victoria in England, she said she was disgusted by them. And disgusted, how can you be disgusted by an ape? For me, it's very hard to imagine, but it must be because she saw them and she reflected all of a sudden, if that's an animal, then I'm an animal too. That's a sort of, it's an inescapable conclusion. And so people are a bit scared of that. Because it reminds them too much of what they are. And so that's why some people also at the zoo, there's many people who laugh. They come to the apes and they start laughing and they think everything is funny that they see. There are animals who are actually much funnier looking. There are animals like penguins and giraffes that I think look really funny. But they laugh at the apes. And that is the laughing that you see at apes is to keep distance, is to create distance, keep them at a distance from themselves. So it's a nervous reaction that people have to the apes. Now, of course, people who work with apes, like myself, and people who work with them every day, they don't see that as funny behavior. We rarely laugh. We laugh at very different moments, I'm sure. Because we don't look at them as inherently funny. But many people have that reaction. And I suppose that is also true in Turkey, that's also true in China. I think everyone who is uncomfortable with seeing them will have this laugh reaction to keep them at a distance.
And
go ahead.
No.
That's certainly true, because I remember the first time I was a child when I saw a gorilla in the zoo, it was like a mirror effect, that it was almost saying that he was imitating me, and that was so uncanny. And I had a really hard time understanding, what is he doing there? Why am I here? What's the differences? And as a child, that was very different experience for me. And then when I started doing observation with chimpanzees at the zoos, I felt the same. And while I was sitting down and taking notes, I heard always the same thing from the people. Oh, they are so like us. Mm-hmm. And for them, some of them are very happy about this, that they found someone that are quite similar to them. But on the same time, some people were irritated by that. And that was scary for them, because like we said previously, we just wanted to be alone in this world and so special. Yeah. And also, of course, I have to admit, in my opinion, they have funny behaviors as well, especially when they're in captivity. And so speaking of the behaviors, maybe we can just talk about behaviors a little more. And so we would like to ask you that there is a great diversity in their behavior, in their social behavior, in primates, especially bonobos and chimpanzees. So what is the reason behind this diversity, in your opinion?
You mean individual diversity?
individual in their social behavior. Yeah.
Yeah, they have personality characteristics. And so recently, for example, we did an analysis of consolation behavior, which is a sort of an expression of empathy. And we found, we looked at 40 chimpanzees and we had the data on them, and we found that it varied from almost zero, so individuals who never showed empathy for others, to very high numbers. And then we looked at the data because we had data over many years, and we found that these characteristics are stable. So you have in the sense that over a 12-year period, it doesn't change much within the individual. So just as in humans, you have individuals who are very empathic, and you have others who are maybe psychopaths who don't care about others. And these are personality characteristics. And we have that at every level. So at every level, so for example, you may have alpha males. Some alpha males are very good and wonderful, and they keep the peace and they protect the underdog. And you have other alpha males who are brutal and they abuse everyone, and they are aggressive, and everyone fears them. So yeah, we have that kind of variability everywhere in the study of the primates. And so that's why also, in the same way that we in humans, we don't do that. We don't say, what is the typical human? We know that in humans there's an enormous amount of individual variability. And that's why for the chimpanzees, you cannot say what is the average chimpanzee. It is very hard to say because everyone is different.
Yeah, that's where I was actually thinking coming from, because we often talk about cultural, evolutional, ecological, social differences in chimpanzees, but the methodology sometimes we always talk that chimpanzees do that, chimpanzees are like this. So we give an understanding that there's a homogeneous understanding of primates, or homogeneous understand of what chimpanzees are. And I feel like that you feel the same, and in your observations, right? That you that's something you come along in the field as well.
Yeah. We as scientists, we like to have averages, like a mean and a standard deviation. That's what we like. And so by doing that, we forget all the individual variability. And so, for example, at the moment, I have a new book coming out, which is on gender. And if you look at the diversity, so we have individuals in let's say in a chimpanzee group, in any primate group, we have individuals who don't fit the gender roles very clearly. So we always have a few males who don't play the status game and are much less aggressive or much less domineering as other males. We have always females who are very masculine in their behavior. And so we have the same variability that you find in human society. And so to say what the average male is and the average female is a simplification, because we have all that overlap between them.
I want to direct a question about their behavior too. We know that actually, although we know that the leaders within chimpanzee groups are males, but they sometimes need the support of females, especially in reconciliation. So what is the motivation behind this? While we were talking on this question in our reading club, we think that it can stem from social pressure or sexual selection pressure. What do you think about it?
You mean the influence of females in the society? Yeah, it varies. So in chimpanzees, most of the stories about chimpanzees that you hear are East African chimpanzees in East Africa, like Gombe with Jane Goodall, or the Mahala chimpanzees studied by Nishida and the Japanese. And in East Africa, the chimpanzees live dispersed over the forest. And the males are very much in charge. And the males are quite aggressive. And if you hear about killing between groups, that's usually in East Africa. That's where these things happen. Then you go to West Africa, So the studies of Christoph Busch, for example, in Thai forest, it's much more integrated. The males and the females often together. The females have more influence because the females are together, and as a result, they help each other. And so there is less sexual violence by males. There is also less violence in general. Females have a bigger say in the group. Then you go to captivity. I've worked all my life with captive chimpanzees, where everyone is always together because we force them together. Then the females have even more influence in these groups of chimpanzees in captivity. Like Mama's Last Hug is about Mama, the alpha female. She had a lot of influence because the females are all together and they help each other. Then bonobos, that's again a different story. Bonobos, they live in the forest together. They travel together very often. And there the females have even more. The females are dominant. So the females have become dominant over the males because they're always together and they're helping each other. So I think there is an enormous variability in the genus Pan for that. And for that reason, not everyone likes bonobos because, in anthropology, I don't know if you are anthropologists, you're probably not, but in anthropology, the story of human evolution is aggression and dominance, and of course male dominance. What they mean by dominance is male dominance. So it is a story of the human species is aggressive and we have killed everybody else, and that's why we are so successful. And so they don't know what to do with bonobos because in bonobos the females are dominant, and so many anthropologists don't like bonobos. They don't fit with their story, and they want to keep them on the side. And I'm almost fighting to keep the bonobos in because bonobos are genetically exactly equally close to us as chimps. There's no genetic reason or also no anatomical reason to set the bonobos to the side as they want to do. So I always need to explain that they are equally relevant to the human story as the chimpanzee.
So we can say that it's not related to sexual selection pressure, right?
Sexual selection is interesting in the little group that we belong to, chimps, bonobos, and us. It may have reversed because if you look at the behinds of these females, of the bonobos and the chimps, they are ornamented. And that's probably sexually selected in the sense that the males are interested in that and the males pick females who have these ornaments, these genital ornaments. And in humans, of course, it's very interesting. In humans, there's a lot of emphasis on female beauty. So whereas in the animal kingdom, like if you look at the peacock or the birds in general, there's a lot of emphasis on male beauty in the animal kingdom. In our little tribe with bonobos, chimps, and humans, I think there's quite a bit of emphasis on female beauty. So that's an interesting reversal. But I suppose that's also sexually selected in the sense that must be the interest of the males in certain females. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, while we're on it, I would like to ask a similar question because of the gender topics that we are in. What does the matriarchy and patriarchy among chimps and bonobos tell us about the traditional Western family structure, if they tell anything? Because I am also excited to hear that you are writing on gender studies too. Maybe you can answer this question.
Yeah, I think that females can have a lot of power, even in a chimp society. So I'm not even talking about bonobos where the females are dominant, but in a chimpanzee society, like with Mama the chimpanzee, she may not be ranking, she doesn't rank above the males, she ranks below the males in terms of dominance, physical dominance, but she can have a more influence. And so female leadership is not unusual, even in a chimp society. And then bonobos, of course, the females are dominant, so there's certainly female leadership. So female leadership is actually, people sometimes say that males will make better leaders I don't see a good reason for that, but that's what people will say. So we humans, it's funny how we are, because we are still very influenced by physical features. So even though we value intelligence and education and experience, we value those very highly. If there is a debate between two candidates for, let's say, president in the United States, for example, you may have two men who have a debate. The data shows that the taller man will win, usually wins more often than the shorter man. So we remain sensitive to the voice of man, to the size of man. Tall is better than short, and so on. So it's funny how we are, because we value other qualities, but we are always influenced by these physical qualities, especially for men. For women, the rules are different. Whether you're tall or short doesn't really matter so much among women. So that, I think that's interesting, and we have these tendencies still. But people sometimes say that men will make better leaders, and it's more natural for men to be leaders. I'm not sure. I've seen a lot of alpha females being very good leaders. And if you study macaques, I don't know if one of you studies macaques. A macaque society and a baboon society is basically a female society. The males come and the males go, but it's a female society, and the alpha female is, of course, the big one that everyone needs to count on. And males sometimes cannot be alpha male if the alpha female doesn't support them. So it's a very important figure.
Yeah, also, so the tall man and the big man influence on human, you mentioned about that, but do we see that in bonobos and chimps too? Not necessarily the same way, but maybe certain physical traits are that important for their social lives too? Or
yeah, I think
do they value more intelligence, characteristics, personality?
Well, in chimpanzees, the physical features are important, and that's why males have a lot of hair and they walk bipedally, and they make themselves look very big, and they make a lot of noise also, usually. But it's not the only thing that counts. You may have in a group of chimps the smallest male who may be the alpha male. If he has the best friends and he has maybe female support, he can be the alpha male. And so physical size does matter for chimpanzees, I think. But it's not the only thing that makes them dominant. And in bonobos, it's very different. In bonobos, the male dominance is tied to their mom. So if their mother is high ranking, they can be high ranking. So since the bonobos are female dominated, the females have a lot to say about the male hierarchy.
I would like to go back just a couple more, just the previous question and your comment that I'm an actually PhD student in anthropology. So I feel you, because I'm not very much liked in some of my classes by professors.
In anthropology, there is a very strong tendency to set the human species apart.
Yeah, definitely, because I had a huge debate that I support that primates have culture, and yeah, that was a bad one. And so that's bring me to the fact that like you mentioned, that we have a history and we want to keep that history. And sometimes we don't see some factors such as ecological factors and the situation where chimpanzees or other primates are into. So and thinking back to the previous things you said, that what kind of ecological factors affecting the social structure in behaviors, especially in gender behaviors or matriarchy, patriarchy, and so on? Like what are the major differences, like the ecological?
Yeah, so that's what I mentioned before, is that if you bring the females together somehow, they're going to support each other. So for example, an orangutan female, orangutans are loners. They travel basically alone through the forest. And so the females are sometimes raped by males because they have no support system, and the males are very big, of course, in the orangutan. So the males are twice as big as the female, and the female have no support network. So that's the extreme in the great apes. In chimpanzees and bonobos, I think the rule that you can say is that the more females are together, the more you get a balance between the males and the females in terms of power, because the females will tend to help each other. And the females are not always sympathetic with each other, but when it comes to male violence, they all defend each other. So the females have a lot of competition among themselves in bonobo group, in chimpanzee group, but when it comes to male harassment and male violence, they help each other. And so then it depends on the ecological conditions. So for example, bonobos travel more together. The females also call each other at night, so that they sleep in the same tree, and not in the same tree, but in trees that are close to each other. So they tend to sleep together in the forest, and they call each other at night when they go to sleep. And that's probably all in order to defend themselves against aggressive males. And the ecology of the bonobo allows them to travel together. And the ecology of many chimpanzee groups doesn't allow them, because if the resources in the forest are poor, if it's more distributed, then they cannot travel together because it creates too much competition among them. So that's them. No one has a good idea of why bonobos are so different from chimpanzees, but most of the scientists say it must be ecological. It must be that the females have enough resources to be together. So that's sort of the main idea.
Now I'm turning the subject into a different point. Actually, it's related with our previous topics. It's about empathy, and you said that empathy should be considered as a characteristic of mammals. So actually, I'm interested in marine biology too, and we are classifying marine creatures as the creatures have empathic characteristics too. So what do you think about this subject? So why do we need to make such a characteristic?
Why do we limit that only mammals have empathy?
Characteristic just only with mammals.
Well, I do think birds are included, and there are some studies on empathy in birds. I always think that the empathy responses that we see in the mammals have to do with parental care, and that would explain why females have more of it than males, and that would explain why oxytocin is involved also in empathy responses. And in birds, you would have a different story, because in many birds have biparental care. It's not just the female, it's the male and the female. So in birds, you would not expect so much of a gender difference in empathy. And if you look beyond birds and mammals, there are a few reptiles with parental care. So for example, crocodiles, they have parental care. And then recently people have claimed that fish may have empathy. So there's a fish study now. So I don't know if it's limited to the mammals. I think it could be that all sorts of animals are affected by the emotions of others. But for the moment, I usually focus on the mammals because we have the data for them. But that doesn't exclude the other ones.
Okay, so if I can somehow conclude and ask another general question, what do you think about the current state of primatology today? And what developments and gaps do you think there are? What can be done for more accurate knowledge and more accurate research on primatology? And also, how do you position yourself in between all of this?
Yeah. What do you mean? How we stimulate primatology? How we develop it further?
develop it further. Maybe there are some gaps or misleadings or misunderstandings towards the science of primatology.
Yeah, I think in primatology, for sure, because there's now so much emphasis on neuroscience everywhere. I think the primatologists need to get involved in neuroscience, and they increasingly do, of course. But I would hope that we can do that by having non-invasive neuroscience. I'm not a big fan personally of the old-fashioned neuroscience on primates where you take a monkey, you put him in a chair and he's restrained, and you do some brain study on the monkey. I don't think we should be doing that. We should train primates. We have a lab here at Emory University where they train dogs to be in a brain scanner. And so they train the dogs to sit still in the brain scanner, and they can do a scan of them. And then afterwards, the dog goes back to the family where he came from. And I think in Lyon, in France, they are trying to do that with macaques now. So they're trying to train macaques to sit still in a brain scanner. And I think there are many ways we can do non-invasive neuroscience. And I think if we do that, we can have an interesting neuroscience of the primates. And that would be very exciting in order to understand their cognition, I think. So that's one way to go. In the field, there's a lot of trouble, of course, with primates in the field that has to do with destruction of their habitat. And so hopefully we can still keep studying primates, but it is under pressure. So for me, the future topics need to be something related to emotions and cognition. I think that's the big topic that is coming up. And that is sometimes hard to do in the field, of course, is that if you want to answer questions about cognition, the field may be an inspiration, but in order to really test the cognition, we need to have captive studies. So I think there is still a lot of room for good captive studies on that kind of topics.
Yeah, so further that, as you mentioned with neuroscience, I also see primatology as a diverse and interdisciplinary field within its nature. So I also had struggles when I'm doing my first readings and research. I always felt the need to know more psychology, sociology, or maybe anthropology. So how can one develop themselves to become a qualified primatologist? Like, what should be the qualifications and characteristics of a future primatologist for our viewers? This question.
Yeah. So anthropology is often the inspiration for the field workers. So many of the field workers are anthropologists by training. But I think biology and psychology are also very important. And especially if you want to do molecular approaches, then biology becomes extremely important for you to know. And if you're interested in cognition, then psychology is very... And of course, in psychology, we have this field, it's called comparative psychology, which is comparing animals with humans. And I usually don't like the term because it sort of excludes evolution. Psychology are always a bit shy about evolution, and so they call it comparative instead of evolutionary approaches. But I think you need all these approaches. So I was trained as a biologist, but I've been for 25 years in a psychology department, so I've seen a lot of psychology. But I think a combination of these three disciplines of biology, psychology, and anthropology is probably the best. And if you want to do neuroscience, you need to take neuroscience courses. But neuroscience on the primates is going to be a challenge, because I don't think in the future there will be a lot of it. I think the neuroscientists, they usually focus on the rodents,
Yeah, one of the reasons probably it will be really interesting to see an fMRI on a chimpanzee, but it also has like a very much ethical considerations and processes, I guess. And so before we close, I have the one last question where we get like myself, and who are interested in primatology always get that. As you mentioned, being a primatologist or doing a primate observation is quite hard, especially if you're living in a country like if you're not living in Africa, or if you're living in a third world country, or the sources are hard. So a lot of people ask that. What can we do? How can we start being a primatologist? And when we are living in a place where there are no primates, and due to geography of the country, and also it's financially and also logistically very hard to be a primatologist. So we always get the question is like, how can I start? What can I do?
Yeah. And do you have zoos that are good in Turkey where you could do some primate work, or not really? Or yeah.
We have couple zoos, but one of the things is that like in Turkey, zoos are not very open to. They're not very used to animal observation. That's one thing. So like it's not like Europe where you're a student and you go there and like work as an intern in summer. I was very fortunate, very lucky enough to do a primate chimpanzee observation on one of the zoos, but especially due to COVID, we cannot continue to that as well. So there are like many obstacles in that.
Yeah, I don't know if you don't have access to zoos and your university has no primates, then the only solution would be to go to the field, or to associate yourself with a lab in Europe, maybe that has access to zoos over there. The development here in the US is that the AZA, it's the organization that oversees the zoos. They are now becoming very positive about research at the zoos. And so they encourage zoos to have researchers. Because I think if a zoo, and maybe that's what you should try to convey to your zoos, local zoos, if a zoo has researchers, first of all, they learn themselves about the animals. They get information from the researcher about what's going on among the animals. But also the public is very interested in hearing from the researcher. And if the researcher now and then talks to the public and tells them, gives them the background on the behavior and the species, I think that's very interesting. And so at the moment, there is a movement here in the US that zoos get more researchers involved. And the researchers are usually students from the university, students who come to do their observations, So that's a development that we have. Otherwise, you have to associate yourself with people who do observations in the big zoos in Europe, for example.
Like for example, bird watching is a quite big thing in Turkey. That's a huge because there's a huge biodiversity, bird biodiversity. But on the other hand, Turkey zoos, especially the one in Istanbul, is accredited to AZA, I guess, and some other European credits as well. So maybe that's something that can be done in the further with having the inspiration about what you said, because that's very important. Just like sitting there hours and hours just observing and seeing what's happening, and what you said, like seeing and observing what's behind the behavior.
And you should then offer to the zoo that you will talk about it. So I think students always, when they come to the zoo, they should be prepared to give the zoo something back. And what they can give back is that maybe once a month or whatever, in the evening, they give a lecture to some of the zoo connector. The zoos always have a list of people that are associated with the zoo, and they can come on occasion to speak to these people, or to speak to children. There's many schools that bring their children to the zoo, and of course, a student can also give a lecture for 100 children to explain certain things to them, and the children will be very interested in that. And so I think if the students come to the zoo and they give something back, the zoo gets some benefits from it, and that's how you should set it up.
Yeah. Thank you very much. This was really amazing. We don't want to take much of your time because this can continue for hours and hours. But this is a really good start because this is a very we are in the very beginning of primatology in Turkey. But we had a opportunity to meet with Jane Goodall last year, and we had a couple of professors from the Japanese Kyoto University, and now we had a chance to meet with you. So this is a start, and we see that more and more people are getting interested in primatology every day. So this is quite exciting.
Wonderful.
Hopefully we will be able to go back to our fieldworks soon and start developing literature in Turkey in this aspect as well. So it was a pleasure having you and talking to you and seeing you, and hope to see you in Turkey after the whole pandemic ends. And you should probably hope to see you in some other countries as well.
Okay.
And thank you very much for your time and for your talk and everything. And we're looking forward to read your new book.
I know. Okay. Nice seeing you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you for everything.
Bye.
Bye-bye. I don't know how I get out of this.